What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a simple interview, only to face disrespect so shocking that he's forced to do something he's never done before? In just 36 seconds, one comment from Kelly Clarkson would turn a friendly conversation into the most uncomfortable moment in daytime television history, and Mark Wahlberg would make a decision that left everyone speechless. The set looked like any other day on The Kelly Clarkson Show. The audience was buzzing with excitement. Mark Wahlberg walked out to huge applause, waving and smiling. He sat down across from Kelly, who seemed cheerful and energetic as always. They started with the usual small talk, nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. Mark talked about his new movie, his workout routine, and his family. Everything felt normal, comfortable, even. "So Mark, you're known for waking up at 3 in the morning?" Kelly asked, leaning forward in her chair. "Yeah, 2:30 usually," Mark replied with a humble smile. "I like to get my workout in before the kids wake up. It's my time, keeps me grounded." Kelly laughed. 2:30. I can barely wake up at 7. But I guess that's the difference between us, right? You're out there being all disciplined and I'm just, enjoying life. The audience laughed. Mark chuckled politely, but something flickered across his face. Just for a second. "Well, everyone's got their own routine," Mark said diplomatically. "Whatever works for you." Right, Kelly said, waving her hand. "But seriously, don't you think that's a little extreme? I mean, who are you trying to impress at 2:30 in the morning?" Mark's smile tightened slightly. "It's not about impressing anyone. It's about discipline. It's about showing up for yourself." "Showing up for yourself," Kelly repeated, her tone slightly mocking. "That sounds like something from a motivational poster." A few people in the audience laughed nervously. Mark shifted in his seat. "I mean, it works for me," he said calmly. "I've been doing it for years." Kelly leaned back, crossing her legs. "Okay, but let's be honest. You've got trainers, chefs, people who do everything for you. It's easy to be disciplined when you've got a whole team making it easy." Mark's jaw tightened. He took a breath. "I do have help, sure. But I still have to do the work. Nobody can do the push-ups for me." "Oh, come on," Kelly said, laughing. "You're telling me your life is hard? Mark, you're a millionaire. You live in a mansion. You've got it made." The audience went quiet. The energy in the room shifted. Mark stared at Kelly, his expression unreadable. "I never said my life was hard," Mark replied, his voice calm but firm. "But I do work hard. There's a difference." Kelly waved him off. Sure, hard work. I'm sure it's really tough being you." Mark blinked. He looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she was joking. "Kelly, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but this feels a little disrespectful." "Disrespectful?" Kelly laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "I'm just being real. I mean, you come on here talking about waking up at 2:30 like you're some kind of hero. It's a little much, don't you think?" "I wasn't trying to be a hero," Mark said, his voice steady but his frustration starting to show. "You asked me about my routine," I answered. "Yeah, and I'm just saying it sounds a little self-righteous," Kelly shot back. "Like, we get it. You're disciplined. You're better than everyone else." Mark sat up straighter. "I never said that. I've never said I'm better than anyone." "You didn't have to say it," Kelly said, her tone sharp now. "It's implied. You wake up early, you work out, you do all these things. Meanwhile, the rest of us are just lazy, right?" "That's not what I think at all," Mark said, his voice rising slightly. "You're putting words in my mouth." Kelly shrugged. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." The audience was dead silent now. You could feel the tension. Mark looked around, then back at Kelly. His face was flushed. "Kelly, I came here to talk about my movie," Mark said, his voice tight. "I didn't come here to be insulted." "Insulted?" Kelly laughed again, but it was hollow. "Oh, please, you're being way too sensitive." "Sensitive?" Mark repeated. He shook his head slowly. "No, you're being rude. There's a difference." "Rude?" Kelly's eyes widened. "I'm the host of this show, Mark. I can ask whatever I want." "Yeah, and I'm the guest," Mark said, standing up now. "And I don't have to sit here and take this." The audience gasped. Kelly's face went pale. "Wait, what are you doing?" "I'm leaving," Mark said simply. He started to unhook his microphone. "You can't just leave," Kelly said, her voice panicked now. "We're in the middle of an interview." "Watch me," Mark replied. He pulled the microphone off and handed it to a producer who had rushed onto the stage. "Mark, come on," Kelly said, standing up too. "Don't be so dramatic." Mark turned to face her. His expression was calm, but his eyes were blazing. "Dramatic? You've spent the last 10 minutes mocking me. You've insulted my work ethic, my lifestyle, and my character. And now you're calling me dramatic for standing up for myself? Kelly opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The audience was frozen. Nobody moved. I've been in this industry for over 30 years, Mark continued, his voice steady and powerful. I've done thousands of interviews, and I've never ever been treated with such disrespect. Not once. I wasn't disrespecting you, Kelly stammered. I was just joking around. Joking around? Mark shook his head. You weren't joking. You were belittling me, and you did it in front of all these people. He gestured to the audience. Some of them were nodding. Others looked uncomfortable. Mark, please, Kelly said, her voice softer now. Just sit back down. We can move on. Move on? Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. Kelly, you don't get it. You can't just say whatever you want to people and then expect them to move on. That's not how respect works. Kelly's face was red now. She looked at the cameras, then back at Mark. I think you're overreacting, and I think you're out of line, Mark replied. I came here as a guest. I was polite. I answered your questions, and you turned it into this. Into what? Kelly snapped, her frustration showing now. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. No, Mark said firmly. You made it a big deal when you decided to disrespect me. I'm just responding to it. The producers were scrambling now, whispering to each other, trying to figure out what to do. Kelly looked lost. She kept glancing at the cameras, like she was hoping someone would tell her what to say. Look, Kelly said, trying to compose herself. Maybe I came on a little strong, but you have to admit, you do kind of flaunt your lifestyle. Mark's eyes went wide. Flaunt my lifestyle? I was answering your questions. You asked me about my routine. I told you, that's not flaunting. That's called having a conversation. But the way you talk about it, Kelly pressed, it's like you're looking down on people who don't do what you do. That's in your head, Mark said, pointing at her. That's your interpretation. I've never looked down on anyone. I've worked with everyone from A-list actors to crew members, and I treat everyone the same. With respect, which is something you clearly don't understand. Kelly's mouth fell open. The audience murmured. Some people were whispering to each other. Others were recording on their phones. I understand respect, Kelly said defensively. Do you? Mark challenged. Because you've shown me none today. Zero. Kelly crossed her arms. You know what, Mark? Maybe you should leave. If you're this upset over a simple conversation, maybe you're not cut out for interviews. The audience gasped again. That was the line. That was the moment everything fully broke. Mark stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not a happy smile. A disappointed smile. Not cut out for interviews, he repeated slowly. Kelly, I've done press tours that lasted months. I've been interviewed by everyone from Oprah to Howard Stern. I've handled tough questions, controversial topics, everything. And I've never walked off a set. Not once. Until today. He took a step back. And you know what the sad part is? You could have had a great interview. We could have talked about the movie, about my career, about anything. But you chose to make it personal. You chose to be mean. And now you're trying to blame me for reacting to it. Kelly's eyes were glistening now. She looked like she wanted to say something, but she couldn't find the words. I hope you figure it out, Mark said quietly. I really do. Because this isn't how you treat people. Guest or not, famous or not, you treat people with dignity. He turned and started walking off the stage. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. A few people started clapping hesitantly. Then more joined in. Within seconds, most of the audience was applauding. Kelly stood there, alone on the stage, watching him go. Her face was a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something else. Maybe regret. Mark, wait, she called out, but her voice was weak. He didn't turn around. One of the producers ran after him. Mark, please, can we just talk about this? Mark stopped at the edge of the stage. He turned to the producer, not to Kelly. There's nothing to talk about. She made her choice. I'm making mine. And with that, he walked off. The audience was still clapping, some of them even standing now. Kelly stood frozen, her hands at her sides, staring at the spot where Mark had been sitting just minutes before. The cameras kept rolling for a few more seconds before someone finally called cut. But the damage was done. The moment was captured, and it was already spreading like wildfire. In the backstage area, Mark's team was waiting for him. They looked concerned, but Mark just shook his head. I'm fine, he told them. I just couldn't sit there anymore. What happened out there? One of his publicists asked. She was disrespectful, Mark said simply. And I wasn't going to tolerate it. His team nodded. They understood. They'd been with him long enough to know that Mark Wahlberg was many things, but he was never someone who accepted disrespect. Not from anyone. Back on the stage, Kelly was being ushered away by her producers. She looked shaken. The audience was still buzzing, talking amongst themselves about what they'd just witnessed. "Did that really just happen?" one woman asked her friend. "I can't believe she talked to him like that," the friend replied. "He was so nice at the beginning." "I know," the woman said. "She just kept pushing and pushing, and then she tried to make it seem like he was the problem," another person chimed in. "That was crazy." All around the studio, people were processing what they'd seen. Some were pulling out their phones, texting friends, posting on social media. The moment was already becoming a phenomenon. Meanwhile, Kelly was in her dressing room, her head in her hands. Her producers were trying to figure out damage control, but she wasn't listening. She was replaying the conversation in her head, hearing her own words, seeing Mark's face. "Why did I say that?" she whispered to herself. "What was I thinking?" But it was too late for regrets. The interview was over. Mark was gone, and the fallout was just beginning. Back in Mark's dressing room, he was changing out of his microphone pack, getting ready to leave. His manager came in, phone in hand. "It's already trending," the manager said. "Everyone's talking about it." Mark sighed. "I figured." "Are you okay?" the manager asked. Mark nodded. "Yeah, I didn't want it to go that way. But I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself." "You shouldn't," the manager agreed. She was way out of line. Mark sat down on the couch in his dressing room. He looked tired, but also relieved, like a weight had been lifted. "You know what the worst part is?" Mark said. "I actually liked her show. I thought she was funny, talented. I was looking forward to this." "I know," the manager said, "but sometimes people surprise you, and not in a good way." Mark nodded. "Yeah. Well, lesson learned." Out in the hallway, crew members were whispering about what had happened. Some were defending Kelly, saying Mark overreacted, but most agreed that Kelly had crossed a line. "She was really harsh," one crew member said. "I've never seen her like that." "Maybe she was having a bad day," another suggested. "That's no excuse," the first one replied. "He's a guest. You don't treat guests like that." In the control room, the producers were watching the footage back, trying to decide what to do. They knew they couldn't air it as it was, but they also knew that cutting it entirely would only make things worse. People had seen it. They'd recorded it. It was out there. "We need to release a statement," one producer said. "What are we going to say?" another asked. "I don't know," the first one admitted. "But we need to say something." Back on the stage, the audience was finally being let out. As they filed out of the studio, they were all talking about the same thing. "That was the craziest thing I've ever seen," one man said to his wife. "I felt so bad for him," the wife replied. "She was so mean. And she didn't even apologize," the man added. "She just kept digging herself deeper." "I know," the wife said. "And then she had the nerve to say he wasn't cut out for interviews? Are you kidding me?" Outside the studio, people were gathering, checking their phones, watching clips that were already being uploaded online. The moment was spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Inside, Kelly was still in her dressing room. One of her producers knocked on the door. "Kelly, we need to talk about what happens next." Kelly opened the door. Her eyes were red. "I messed up," she said quietly. "We'll figure it out," the producers said, though they didn't sound convinced. "How?" Kelly asked. "How do we figure this out?" "I insulted Mark Wahlberg on live television, and he walked off. There's no spinning this." The producer didn't have an answer, because Kelly was right. There was no spinning this. The video was everywhere. People were taking sides, and overwhelmingly, they were siding with Mark. In his car on the way home, Mark was scrolling through his phone. Messages were pouring in from friends, colleagues, fellow actors, all of them supportive. "Good for you for walking away. She was completely out of line. You handled that with class." Mark smiled slightly. At least people understood. At least they saw what had really happened. But he also felt sad. Sad that it had come to that. Sad that a simple interview had turned into such a mess. He'd been doing this for decades, and nothing like this had ever happened before. As his car pulled up to his house, Mark put his phone away. He was done thinking about it for now. He had a family waiting for him, kids who wanted to hear about his day, a normal life that had nothing to do with talk shows or drama. He walked through his front door, and his kids ran up to him, hugging him. "Dad, how was the interview?" Mark smiled. "It was interesting," he said. "I'll tell you about it later." For now, he just wanted to be home, to be with the people who mattered, to remember what was really important. But the world outside wasn't done talking about what had happened. Social media was exploding. News outlets were picking up the story. Everyone had an opinion. Kelly Clarkson crossed the line. One headline read, "Mark Wahlberg walks off set after being disrespected." Another said, "The most uncomfortable interview ever." A third declared, "Videos were being analyzed frame by frame. Body language experts were weighing in." Everyone wanted to understand how a simple interview had gone so wrong, so fast. And at the center of it all were two people. Kelly Clarkson, sitting in her dressing room, wondering how she'd let things spiral out of control, and Mark Wahlberg, at home with his family, knowing he'd made the right choice. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about fame or fortune or who was more successful. It was about respect, about treating people the way you want to be treated, about knowing when to stand up for yourself. And Mark Wahlberg had done exactly that. He'd stood up, he'd spoken his truth, and he'd walked away with his dignity intact. Kelly, on the other hand, was left to deal with the consequences of her words. The show that was supposed to be fun and lighthearted had become the center of a controversy. Her reputation, built on being relatable and kind, was now being questioned. In the days that followed, people would talk about this moment endlessly. They'd debate who was right and who was wrong. They'd share their own stories of being disrespected. They'd use it as an example of how not to conduct an interview. But in that moment, as Mark walked through his front door and Kelly sat alone in her dressing room, the story was simple. One person had chosen to be disrespectful, and the other had chosen not to tolerate it. And sometimes, that's all it takes. One moment, one decision, one choice to stand up for yourself. Mark Wahlberg had made his choice, and he didn't regret it for a second. The audience members who had been there would never forget what they'd witnessed. Some of them would tell the story for years to come, about the day they saw Mark Wahlberg walk off the Kelly Clarkson show, about how uncomfortable it was, about how you could feel the tension in the room. But they'd also talk about how dignified Mark had been, how he'd tried to keep things civil, how he'd only left when it became clear that Kelly wasn't going to stop. He gave her so many chances, one audience member would later say. He kept trying to steer the conversation back, but she just wouldn't let it go. And when he finally left, another would add, you could tell it wasn't easy for him, but he had to do it. He had to stand up for himself. That's what people would remember most. Not the drama, not the controversy, but the fact that Mark Wahlberg, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, had shown that even famous people have limits, that everyone deserves respect, that sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do. Kelly would have to live with what happened. She'd have to face the criticism, the backlash, the questions about why she'd acted that way. She'd have to do some serious self-reflection about how she conducts her interviews, how she treats her guests. But Mark could move on knowing he'd done the right thing. He'd handled himself with grace under pressure. He'd shown that success and fame don't mean you have to tolerate being treated poorly. And in a world where celebrities are often expected to just smile and take whatever comes their way, Mark Wahlberg had shown that sometimes you have to draw a line. He'd drawn his line, and he'd walked away. And that, more than anything else that happened that day, was what people would remember. Not the insults, not the tension, but the moment when Mark Wahlberg stood up, took off his microphone, and chose his self-respect over staying on camera. It was a lesson everyone could learn from, about dignity, about boundaries, about knowing your worth. And it all happened in less than 15 minutes. 15 minutes that would be talked about, analyzed, and remembered for years to come. Because that's what happens when someone finally says enough. When they stop accepting behavior that's unacceptable. When they walk away from something that doesn't serve them. Mark Wahlberg walked away from the Kelly Clarkson show that day. But he walked away with something far more valuable than any interview could have given him. He walked away with his dignity. And that's something no one can ever take away.